Welcome, everyone, to Dog Tech's Day Training Web Seminar. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Gina Ferris, Business and Case Consultant for Dog Tech, and joining me today is author and founder of Dog Tech, Veronica Bautel. Before we get started, I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about Veronica and myself. Veronica has her master's in education, and before beginning Dog Tech, she served as director of the San Francisco SPCA's Behavior and Training Department, as well as running her own dog walking and training business. As for me, I came to dog training after first getting a degree in communications and working in the media. After that, I ran my own training business before I went to work for the San Francisco SPCA, first as their rehabilitation coordinator for the Behavior and Training Department, and then as an instructor in the San Francisco SPCA's Academy for Dog Trainers. So that's a little bit about us. Thank you all for taking the time to tell us a little bit about yourself with the day training poll we did earlier as you were all kind of logging on to the call. It looks like we have a mixture of people who are already doing day training as well as those who are just thinking of trying it out. So we hope we have some suggestions that will help those of you who are already actively doing day training that will help move your business forward, and particularly by offering you some marketing strategies that are geared specifically for day training. For those of you who are just thinking about offering the service, we'll be going through the nuts and bolts of how to effectively offer day training, and we're going to be doing that in just a bit. I'm going to start with a brief introduction about what day training is, and then Veronica will take us through the basics of day training and marketing day training. And finally, I'll wrap us up with a sample plan, the sample day training plan, which we'll do at the end of the seminar. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's start with what is day training. Day training is different from the typical coaching model of training where you train the client to then train their dog. Day training is different in that the trainer actually does the large percentage of the training of the dog and then transfers that information to the training client, or to the client. The day training is really effective for several things. It's great for obedience, it's great for manners training, and it's really effective for most behavior modification cases. Any case that requires a large training element as opposed to a management element is going to fit real nicely into day training. The exceptions might be things like counter surfing that don't have a large training component and is mostly about the client changing their own behavior or managing situations. Other than that, these other areas fall really nicely into day training, and it's very effective. Why day train? We want to look at that today. The biggest reason for day training is just better training results. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Dog trainers are better dog trainers than their clients. And so the dog gets trained more efficiently and more effectively, typically, with day training. Part of the reason is because clients just don't want to be dog trainers. And I know that, we often complain the clients aren't complying, they're not doing their homework. I don't think that's because trainers or because clients don't love their dogs. I think they do. I think they just don't have the same passion for the training of the dog that we have. That's why we became dog trainers, because we find it to be fun and even entertaining, and clients don't. So just like I don't think I'm a bad car owner because I don't want to change my own oil. I like my car, I treat it well, I just am not interested in the mechanics behind it. That doesn't make me a bad car owner. It just means that's not my interest. So instead of fighting our clients' mentality about, we want an easy button, we want a quick fix, instead of seeing that as a negative, day training really answers that with, okay, we're going to put the person who is the most equipped to train this dog doing the training, and then we're going to teach you how to maintenance that behavior, how to continue to get it. The other thing about day training is that well-behaved dogs are generally treated better. They get to be inside, they get to be a more active part of their families. So if we as trainers can take on the responsibility of making sure they're better behaved, they're going to be a more central part of the family, which is what we're kind of all looking for. Day training is also good for business. It generally means an increase in your training revenue because you're actually able to sell the number of sessions that it will take to finish the work. So often when we go in and coach people to train their dogs, as soon as they start to see a little bit of relief, they're not interested in buying more training. Or it starts to feel like an impossible task, they're not getting their homework done, and so they don't go ahead and stick with the training as long as they need in order for it to be effective. With day training, Veronica's going to walk you through, you're actually going to sell just exactly the number of sessions that you need to make sure the dog is effectively trained, and so that you can build upon that success. That means more sessions, usually, which means an increase in your revenue. And then finally, day training is just an easier marketing message. We teach you to train your dog is not as powerful as we do the training for you or come home to a well-behaved dog, which is what many of our clients are looking for. And it's just more professional. The idea that in just an hour's time you can teach someone what you have probably spent years learning undermines the profession and takes away our professionalism. And I think that it's important for us to say, no, it does take an education and it takes training to be a good dog trainer, and we don't expect someone to pick all of that up in an hour. When I taught in San Francisco, it took 6 weeks to take people from people who were generally more motivated than clients to teach them to become dog trainers, to make sure they had effective timing and good criteria setting. It took 6 weeks, about 240 hours in total of them working day and night to learn that skill, and yet we go into a client's home and we expect them to do it with just an hour a week. So again, just as a profession, I think it's time for us to step back and say, take the reins back a little bit and say, yeah, we really can train the dogs, and we don't necessarily expect the clients to do it. Now, that doesn't mean the client isn't an active part of the training process, and it doesn't mean they don't have anything to do, but it means they don't need to necessarily learn how to fade lures and things like that. Day training, the basic structure, there are 3 pieces to it. One are the training sessions. The training sessions is what you, the trainer, do with the dog, and the parent may or may not be present, but that's the actual installing of new behaviors. The transfer sessions that we refer to are where is the session that you have with the client. It's where you teach the client not how to fade the lure on the down, but how to ask the dog for a down and reward it when they do, or what to do if the dog doesn't do a down when they've requested a down. So the transfer session is when you and the client work together with the dog. And finally, there are the follow-up sessions. And follow-up sessions occur after the training has taken place. So the dog has been trained, you've transferred all that training to the client, but a week or 2, sometimes longer after the training is complete, you're checking in with the clients, you're meeting with them again, kind of watching them in action to make sure that the training is really sticking, that there aren't any problem spots. A typical weekly model for this is a 3-in-1. We call it a 3-in-1, where you meet with the dog 3 times. So there are 3 training sessions a week and 1 transfer session. So you meet with the dog 3 times, and then another time you meet with the client and the dog. And then, again, as I said, probably around 2 follow-up sessions in most cases. So that's a real typical kind of structure of how day training, how the day training might work. At this point, Veronica's going to walk us through what that then translates to in a week or in your weekly schedule. If you are doing day training, what does that look like? What does your week look like?
Yeah, so, there is not a one set way to do this, and we offer this calendar just to sort of show one type of model for what it might look like. And the other reason we show the calendar is that we really, really believe that you should have 2 days off a week, every single week. And I'm shocked as we go around the country and we give business seminars, and I will sometimes ask I've asked a room with 300 people in it, how many of you have 2 days off most weeks? And, there are fewer than 5 people who raise their hands, and you only get a smattering more when you ask about 1 day. And it really is possible to work full-time as a dog trainer, make a living, and have time off. And so one of the things we like about day training is that it does suggest a schedule that allows for that. So in this case, for example, this is a 3-in-1 model, and you can see that the dog training sessions are taking place during the days, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And so the trainer is going out to the client's homes to work with the dog, possibly taking the dog out into the surrounding environment wherever the training needs to take place during the day, and then seeing the clients for transfer sessions Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday evenings. Also has some appointments with clients on Saturdays, which can also be transfers, or they can be follow-ups, or they can be initial consults for new clients coming in. The nice thing about this is it leaves this trainer all day Wednesday to actually work on the business, which is the most key component to being successful, because if we don't do our marketing and take care of our paperwork and that sort of thing, then the business stagnates. And so this actually gives this trainer a pajama day to stay at home and get things done, and then she's got Sundays and Mondays off. Now again, this is just one example schedule, and it can be set up however it works for you, but just want to illustrate that it really is possible in a day training model to get some time off for yourself. And so again, the trainer is moving from dog to dog during the day, and then finishing up with transfer sessions in the evening to see the client. Although, there are some dog trainers who do those transfer sessions during the day as well. It depends on your clientele. Okay. So moving on to some day training tips, some general things to keep in mind as we go through this. One, and just this should really become your mantra when you're working on training plans in this model, less is more. It's about depth, not breadth. It's about installing a small number of very, very well-proofed behaviors instead of introducing all sorts of behaviors that only get partially proofed. And so this is a mistake we make in classes a lot, for example, where we introduce lots and lots of behaviors that we never really have time to get any one of them particularly strong. In day training, our goal is to proof the behaviors before we transfer them, so we don't want to complicate the training plan by introducing too many things. What are the few things you need to help this client reach their goals? One of the things we really recommend is something we call a universal cue, which is the idea of thinking about, for any particular client and their problem and their goal set, is there one, maybe two cues that could really take care of everything? And you're going to see an example of this in the training plan later, but dog-dog issues are a really good illustration of this. So if I've got a dog who's reactive on leash, I could teach all sorts of things. I could teach a find it, I could teach a watch, I could teach a leave it, I could teach a let's go, I could teach a here. There are so many behaviors I could teach, but really there's no reason to teach them all. I might teach one or two, get them really, really strong, and then use that in all situations. Watch and leave it and hear, all basically do the same thing, which is to get the dog to turn away from the other dog and look at you. There's no need to teach all of those. When you are putting your plan together, so Gina talked about the 3-in-1, which is just one way it can be done, and it doesn't have to be done that way. I mean, you might look at a particular case and decide that you want to see a client, see a dog 4 times a week or 5 times a week, and this happens sometimes when maybe you've got a dog-dog case where the client has become really fearful, and so you're going to see the dog 5 days a week for a little while, so that the owner isn't walking the dog, and then go down to 3-in-1. But however you're doing this, the critical piece when you're putting your plan together is to front load the easily transferred foundation behaviors. And so your plan might call for doing a number of things, but if you're at the end of the week, you need to transfer something. And you're probably only going to transfer one or two things at a time, but you have to transfer something to the client, and you don't want to transfer anything that's not well-proofed because we're trying to set them up for success. We want the dog to be responsive. We want the dog to already know the game pretty darn well. And so simple things like sits and watches and find it, really simple behavior that they're going to be able to be successful with at the end of a week of you working with the dog several times, those are the things you want to make sure you focus on in that first week. And it's okay to introduce other things too. I mean, you might start working on loose leash walking, for example, or you might start doing some desensitization and counter conditioning. You might be doing other things, but you want to make sure you're leaving time in that first week to really, really proof one or two foundation behaviors that you can transfer to the client and have them get some immediate success with. Okay. Gina has a saying that I really love. She says, get out of the kitchen, but you don't have to leave the state. And I love, love, love this. Her point here is that you want to train in the key environments. You want to train where the client is actually going to need the dog to be responsive. And so if they're having trouble walking their dog in their neighborhood, for example, we're not going to limit the training to the backyard. We're going to go out and proof that dog in the neighborhood. But we don't have to take the dog, put him in the car, and drive him all the way across town to work in another neighborhood if they never go there. So the point is to make sure that in the initial consult, we're establishing very clear goals with the client, including what locations they take their dog to, including where these problems are occurring so that we can plan accordingly while we're working the dog. Because, again, the focus is on proofing for distraction, and we want as many real-life trials as possible because, life is a series of real-life trials. And, if we're only training when the dog is warmed up, then the chances that the owner will get the behavior in a hot moment are reduced. And so we want to make sure that we are moving, from place to place and trying things out, but we don't have to get real complicated with it. As Gina says, we don't have to leave the state. So, one of the advantages that several of our clients have noted who do day training is that you don't have to hassle so much with fading lures and other prompts and this worry about having reliance on treats and things like that because you're a dog trainer. You know how to fade lures, you know how to fade prompts, you know how to fade treats out of the picture. It's so much more difficult to teach these things to clients. And so as you're doing your day training, one thing to keep in mind in your planning is to fade these things as quickly as possible because although we'll, try to teach the owners to reinforce properly and to carry their bait bags and things like that, we know that they tend to be a bit stingy. We know that they tend to be a bit forgetful, and they're never as generous with reinforcement as trainers are. So the more quickly we have the dog off a reliance on that, the better. And the more successful this is going to be in the home. We do, of course, we are working with the owner to learn reinforcement, but we want to make sure that the dog isn't working, only when there's food in hand. Because that's not going to be a realistic picture in most households. So fade, fade, fade. Okay, transfer tips. So when we're thinking about transfer sessions, this session at the end of the week for each client, we are, again, wanting to transfer only proofed behavior. So you may have worked on a whole bunch of things in any particular week, but you're only going to show the client the things that are ready to transfer because they're well enough proofed that the dog's going to be able to do them in at least moderately distracting situations. We also want to only transfer 2 or 3 behaviors or concepts per session. We don't want to overwhelm the clients. We're not, we don't want to show, even if we have 6 things that are ready, we're not going to transfer 6 things all at once. This is part of why we have these follow-up sessions at the end, too, because generally you and the dog will be ahead of the game. You and the dog will be ahead of the owner, and those those follow-up sessions allow you to get the owner caught up, as well as, checking in, as Gina said, to make sure that everything's going smoothly. So just a couple of things per session. Nothing for free is a great concept to teach at that first transfer session. So when you transfer a foundation behavior like a sit or a watch, something like that, this is a really great opportunity to introduce the concept of nothing for free as a way of hopefully impacting the client's behavior with the dog, and also giving them a way to practice and reinforce those behaviors on a regular basis, and in a way that doesn't necessarily always require food. That they're practicing the sits and the watch for doors opening and leashes on and off, and balls being thrown and food dish being put down, and any other thing that you and the client can brainstorm. And that's a little tip here too, is explain the concept to them, get them to generate the list, get the client, ask the client, so what are all, you give them one or two suggestions and say, what are the other ways, on a day-to-day basis you could use this? What other things could we ask your dog for a sit or a watch for instead of giving it away for free? Get them to generate that list. You might even give them a nice branded handout that they can write the ideas down on and stick on the fridge, because generating the ideas themselves, writing them down themselves, the likelihood that they will remember to do it in the course of the day is much higher than if we just say it at them. The other thing to think about in that first session is, and probably in subsequent sessions as it comes up as well, is to think about teaching basic learning theory as well, but in lay language. The simple concepts about behaviors that are reinforced are going to happen more often. Behaviors that we don't like that are reinforced are also going to happen more often, and so helping them, to understand the basic concepts that they need to know to be successful with this, but in lay language. Okay. Now let's look at what a transfer session is actually going to look like here. Okay. So one of the points that Gina made in the beginning is that with day training, we're not having to teach the owner to be a junior dog trainer. We're installing behavior, we're undoing unwanted behavior, and installing, alternate, more desirable ones. We're transferring that behavior, and we're just going to teach them how to ask for it and reinforce it and what to do if they don't get it, which means that one of the things that clients have to learn is how to handle distraction. Because even, we're going to proof, but we know that there's no such thing as 100% reliability, so they need to know what to do when they don't get something. So you pick a behavior you're going to transfer, and you demo it. You show it off. So let me show you what Fido has learned. One of the nice things about this is it's an opportunity to warm the dog up a bit, get them remembering the game so that mom and dad can have some success, and then have them practice it. Show them, okay, here's how you're going to do it. Walk them through it and get them working with the dog successfully. So they're doing their sits or their watch or whatever it is that you're transferring, and it's going really smoothly, and they ask for it, they get it, they ask for it, they get it, they ask for it, they get it. They're feeling delighted, the dog is on its game. And then say, let's move to the backyard and practice this. But don't say anything about why, don't say anything about it's going to be harder back there, or nothing like that. Just go on back and let it fall apart. And if you've proofed the dog well enough that it doesn't fall apart, create a distraction. Distract the dog. Do something to make it too hard for the dog. Then stop with the owner and talk about the role of distraction. This is the time to bring it up. Bring it up in context where they've just had an experience. It was working beautifully in there, and now it's not working here. Let's talk about why. Because now they have a contextual framework to understand this concept. So you explain the role of distraction, and you show them how to handle it. Whatever tips or techniques you're going to use, whether it's increasing reinforcement or moving distance away or body blocking or whatever techniques you're going to teach them. Get it working well again. Reinforce them for that. And then when it's working really smoothly again, you say, let's move to the front yard or wherever would be a more distracting environment. But then say, hey, before we do so, let's think about it. Given what happened back here, what do you expect to have happen in the front yard? What are the distractions out there for your dog? And get them brainstorming. maybe there's a squirrel that lives in the front yard tree. Maybe there's a dog across the street. Maybe there's a lot of traffic noise that distracts the dog. And then ask them, okay, given that, what are you going to do? What's your plan? Given what we practiced here and the experience you just had in the backyard, what's your plan for helping Fido to be successful out front? And what you're doing right here is you are handing over the reins from the very first transfer session. You're teaching them how to think about working with their dog. You're transferring the concepts and skills that they have to have in order to continue your training on, situational awareness and working at the dog's level, and being able to judge the environment and respond to it. And what you're doing is you're removing the scaffolding as quickly as you can. In other words, the support. If one of the mistakes we often make as trainers, both in classes and private training, is we stand at the client's elbow and we tell them what to do every step of the way, which means they never learn to act proactively themselves. They never learn how to solve problems themselves, and that's what we're teaching. And the wonderful thing is we have time to do it, because we're not spending all our time teaching them how to install a behavior. We've already done that. We have time to teach them these larger, broader concepts and skill sets that they really need to be successful in their world with their dog. When we take them out into the yard, into that front yard, we want to step back and not give any direction. They have said what their plan is. Now they're going to go in the front yard and execute it. And our role is to heavily, heavily reinforce any unprompted responses. So when they go out there and start working their dog, we reinforce that. If their dog starts to become distracted and fall apart and they make an adjustment, we reinforce the heck out of that. If they don't make an adjustment and we need to prompt them, prompt with a question instead of a suggestion. So instead of saying, oh, it looks like Fido's distracted by the squirrel in the tree, why don't we move farther away? We'll say something like, Fido seems to be having some trouble. What do you think is distracting him? What's making this hard for him? Get them to look around and identify, and then say, okay, well, given the things we tried in the backyard, what could we do to help Fido be successful? What could we do to make this easier for him? We're trying to get them to take over the reins. And some clients will do the learned helplessness thing. They'll wait for a suggestion. Your job is to remember not to give it. Prompt with questions instead, and then reinforce their answers, reinforce anything they try. Get them taking control.
Veronica, another strength of teaching people to work with distractions early on is that it also gets them in the mindset of understanding that the dog is going to make mistakes. I think sometimes when they watch us demo and the dog is doing it beautifully and then the dog won't do it for them, it can be very frustrating, and they start to look at the dog as if it's defective. And when you teach them that, no, the dog is going to make mistakes and here's how you handle it, it empowers them, but it also takes the pressure off the dog of being perfect all the time.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful point, and it normalizes dog behavior. Great point. Now, in one other piece of setting clients up for success is when we first started teaching day training, one of the reports we got back several times right in the beginning was, oh gosh, I went into the transfer session and the dog completely blew off the owner. The dog was sitting in front of the trainer because, hey, trainers, we opened the bait bag, and the trainer had a really hard time getting the dog to focus on the owner at all. And so we said, we better go back to the drawing board on that. And so some of the things that we've taught folks that really help with this, one is proof the dog on other people prior to the first transfer session. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I mean, one is if you are fortunate enough to have an assistant or a colleague that you can or even a spouse or a friend, because to be honest, the less dog experienced they are, the better, because the owners aren't particularly dog experienced usually. But to have somebody come along with you on one of your training appointments, to go through all the same motions with the dog, so that the dog starts to realize, oh, I see, this works for other people too, not just with this trainer. The other way to do this is if you're taking the dog out and about into the environment, you're going to work at the mall to distraction-proof or in a neighborhood or a park or whatnot. If it's safe to do so, i.e., you're not working stranger aggression or something like that, to stop interested passersby. So a lot of times, particularly if you're wearing logo clothing or something like that, and you're in full training mode, people will stop and say, "Oh my gosh, are you a trainer?" Or "Oh, what a cute dog," or whatnot. And that's a really great time to say, "Yes, actually I am. Do you have a moment?" And ask that person to stop and put the dog through the paces that you're practicing, the behaviors that you're proofing for the transfer session. That helps a lot. Another thing that you can do is to have the client start before you actually do transfer the first behavior. Have the client start with a rapid-fire treat delivery exercise where you give them some really high-value treats, have them stand there and say, "I want you to give your dog a treat every 2 seconds or every 1 second, 1,000, 2 1,000, 3, and just say, I know it's going to sound completely crazy, but think about it. We're priming the dog. You make any joke you want, any analogy you want, but get them to do that. And all we're really doing is just trying to convince the dog that contrary to previous experience, this parent actually can be a good pet dispenser, and so it's worth paying some attention. And then also give them high-value reinforcers at these transfer sessions and carry low-value yourself, so that you're creating a bit of a contrast and a reason for them to choose to work for the owner as well. And doing these few things, really in general solves that problem beautifully, but it is helpful to do them. Okay. The next topic here is managing client expectations, something that's important no matter what kind of private training you're doing, but particularly important with day training. At the initial consult, there are several things that you're going to want to explain. You'll go through your regular initial consult, do your intake interview, assess the issue, figure out what's going on, etc. Once you and the client have agreed that yes, you're going to work together, and they've agreed to do the program, we want to walk them through a few things. One is, your role, and your role as the trainer is to establish and transfer the behavior. That's the role you're going to be doing. Their role is to maintain it, and they have an important role to play. And given that the transfer session is critical, and it's really important that clients understand this. I'm going to come in and do this for you. I can make this easier. I can make it happen faster. We can get this done and get it done effectively, but without the transfer session, all the time I spend is wasted, all the money you spend is wasted, nothing happens without the transfer session. They have to understand that without those transfer sessions, the dog is going to behave for you but not for them, and to be really, really very straightforward and clear about that, to make sure that that it doesn't get blown off, that they don't cancel it. And we'll talk about cancellation policies in a bit. Also explain to them what to expect between now and the first transfer session, which is pretty much probably nothing, to make sure that they understand you're going to come in and train the dog several times before you and the owner see each other again, but that they aren't likely to see any results until the behavior is transferred, which, again, is why the transfer sessions are so important. But do tell them, of course, that, if they do happen to see something that they like, if the dog does try something new out on them, that they should let the dog know that they really like it and suggest some ways that they could do that. But don't tell them what you're going to work on in that week, because what we don't want them to do is to try it out. Like, I wonder if, Fido sit, Fido watch. We don't want them to be trying it. So don't tell them what you're going to do. Just, if you see something you like, you let the dog know you like it. And then we also need to talk to them about what to expect if they attend the training sessions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides, but we're basically telling them, listen, if you want to come and watch the training sessions, of course you're welcome to do that, although you don't need to. I mean, that's part of the marketing message, right? You can be at work, you can be taking the kids to soccer, do whatever you need to do, but if you want to attend, that's fine, but I'll be working, the dog, and so, I'm going to be working the dog, and essentially I will, leave a few minutes at the end for questions. And so you're just making sure that they understand that those training sessions aren't going to be interactive with them. So setting all these expectations so that everything goes smoothly and you're walking into a situation, that matches your expectation. We also want them to understand outcomes, and so we want to explain the range of possible outcomes and the variables that impact which outcome they get, So again, one of the most important ones is their role in maintaining behavior and showing up at the transfer sessions. But when we're working BMOD cases, it's important for them to understand that there are other variables at play. The level of fear that is associated with the behavior, or a root cause of the behavior is going to make a big impact. The genetic envelope, this notion that there are genes at play, and then there's the environment and the training process at play, and we can impact one of those. We can't, the genes are the genes, and there's not a lot we can do. So if we have a dog who, there are some dogs we can do who have fear, for example, and we're able to bring them up to a really confident place with training. And some dogs we can make better, but not bring them up to, kind of the friendly, lab running up to everybody, sort of results. And so they need to understand that, this dog has some range of ability, to change this component of their personality, and we won't know what it is until we get in there and try. The reinforcement history. So, for example, if a dog has been reinforced for a particular behavior that we don't like, barking, for example, for 10 years and has been very, very successful with that, it's going to take longer to change that, right? That's going to impact, how long, it takes us to see results and what those results look like. And then again, because it just can't be stressed enough, the client's role in maintaining behavior. Al Medina asked a wonderful question in the Q&A chat about, do we think it's a good idea to leave some sort of a handout about these expectations with clients? And I think she was speaking particularly to the previous slide. This notion of here are some of the things to expect. And I think a branded handout explaining some of these things is a great idea. You're going to say them all out loud anyway, but of course leaving it in writing just reinforces it, and absolutely you can do that. It's a great suggestion. Okay. Now, when clients attend training sessions, so the truth is we'd sort of prefer they don't. It's easier for us to just get down to work and do the training and not have that distraction, and frankly we don't want them watching because we don't want them practicing what we don't want to transfer yet. But it's their dog and it's their home, and we can't tell them not to, and so sometimes they will. Now, what I generally suggest is that you don't encourage it. You can say, of course, you're welcome to be there, but of course, the service is designed so that you don't have to be. You can be getting things done, and et cetera. So you're kind of encouraging them in a subtle way not to. But, if I were hiring a day trainer that I didn't know, I'd probably want to attend at least the first one just to make sure that I was indeed comfortable with what was going on. And so, some of them will. When they attend training sessions, suggest that they grab a paper and pen. In fact, you can even take this one step farther and have a nice branded note, sheet of note paper with you and a pen, and hand it to them. And then tell them, okay, well, we have an hour, and I'm going to spend 50 minutes training the dog, and I'm going to really focus to make sure that I get done what needs to get done, and then I will stop 10 minutes early to answer questions that you have. And you might even go so far. Some of our clients actually have a timer. They'll set a timer on their iPhone or their watch, or even a little kitchen timer or something that goes off at 50 minutes and then goes off at 10 minutes again too, just to help them get out on time. And then literally turn your back on the client and train the dog. Absolutely resist the temptation to narrate what you're doing. You're not doing a demo, you're training. And so just train as though no one were there. Just train to get through whatever training plan you've set up and whatever your goals are for the day. And then the timer goes off, or you look at your watch and realize it's 50 minutes, and then you stop and you say, okay, and then say, okay, I've left 10 minutes to take questions. And what you're doing there is you're just signaling again, we're only going to talk for 10 minutes. Because you need to be able to get out and get to your next appointment. Don't feel like you have to answer every question they ask. There may be questions that they ask where they're just curious, like, well, what is that little noise box you're using if you're using a clicker? And you just explain that, and that's fine. Or why did you do that? Or what did it mean when you said, blah, 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 whatever. And that you can answer some simple questions. What did it mean when you said too bad, or, whatnot. But they're also going to ask some questions that it's really too early to answer or that are too complex. And the answer to those are, ooh, great question. we're going to cover that in detail at the transfer session. Right? Be ready with that, because if you feel compelled to answer every single question, of course, you could easily be there for an extra hour. So that's a great question. I'm actually going to cover that in detail at the transfer session, where we'll have much more fun, and it will make more sense at that point too. So things like that, be okay pushing that off. And if they ask a question that has nothing to do with the goals, so if they start, you're there to fix a particular problem, and they start asking a question about a completely different behavior, you need to be strong and say, that's a fantastic question, but it sure opens up a whole other set of goals and things we would need to do. My advice is for us to complete this training plan to reach your goals, which we laid out as X, Y, and Z, remember. And then if you'd like to address this new issue afterward, I'd be really, really happy to look at adding some sessions on to do that. Right, so just be really, really clear about what questions you're going to answer, which questions you're going to put off to transfer sessions, and if absolutely new things come up, it is completely okay. In fact, it's tremendously professional to just say, wow, that's outside the scope of the goals we've set, but let's revisit that at the end and see if we'd like to work on that when we've solved these problems. Okay. And then, client expectations again. Before you leave, that session that they've been watching, before you leave, say to them, they shouldn't expect to see the behaviors that they worked on. And you say, these behaviors aren't finished yet. Right? We've been working on these, but they're not finished, and you probably shouldn't expect to see them. And be really clear about what they should and shouldn't do. So, this is kind of the don't try this at home message. And you can even make a joke and say it that way, if use a little bit of humor. If they see a behavior, if the dog offers it, then absolutely they should reinforce it. But be really, really clear that they really should not ask for it, right? That asking the dog to do the things that it saw today will actually slow the training down and undermine it, because the dog isn't ready yet. I know it looks like he is, but he really isn't ready yet. But you can give them some things that they could do. So if there's something, something really simple, so for example, if you're clicker training and they really seem keen to do something, you could show them, how to charge the clicker. You've probably already done it, but if they want to work on it too, or again, if you see a behavior you do like, go ahead and reinforce it, and here's how to do it. You want to be careful not to just say don't, but the don't messages really do need to be firm. Okay. At the transfer sessions, one thing about managing client expectations here is to be really careful to explain how the behavior that they're seeing, the behavior that's been transferred, fits into the finished picture, and kind of what happens next. Because one of the things that can happen is that sometimes clients get frustrated. So they've called us in because the dog is lunging and growling at other dogs when they're walking around the neighborhood on leash. And then we spend a whole hour transferring sit or watch or both or something like that. And we didn't even go on leash. We didn't walk on leash. We didn't go outside. And it can feel like it's not relevant. It can feel like we're not addressing their goals. And so we want to make sure that they understand how what we're doing now is building toward the finished picture. And so, here's why we're teaching this and how it will help or fit into the end goal. We're teaching watch because our goal is for Fido to look at you when he sees a dog instead of barking at it. So we need to get this really strong. Eventually, we're going to do some stuff on leash, and then we're going to put all these things together and start working around dogs, and you're going to see a nice finished picture. But that's why we're spending some time right now doing just this. All right, just help them understand where it fits. We've noticed both in our work with dog tech clients and in the research project we did on day training that many trainers struggle with the pressure to perform, and we definitely saw that in the results as well. I think there was in the poll, I think it was something, I didn't quite catch the number before we moved to the screen, but I think it was something like 67% of you said that you feel that pressure to perform in day training. To produce training results. And in the coaching model where we go in and we tell the trainer, or we work with the client once a week, here's what here's what to do, here's how to work with your dog. Now you do your homework for a week, and I'll be back. In the coaching model, we tend to be really frustrated with poor client compliance, as Gina said at the beginning. But when we're really honest with ourselves, there's also some consolation that at least the lack of results aren't our fault. That they fall at the feet of the clients. The clients aren't doing their homework. The clients aren't following instructions. But in day training, a great deal more is up to us. And for trainers who've been coaching for a long time, there's an understandable fear of being able to actually get and change dog behavior. But shouldn't that ultimately be our job? That we're dog trainers and we should be training dogs. And there's really no reason to fear. What's interesting about this, too, is we found in the research that new trainers who hadn't been, were just coming into the profession, didn't feel this fear nearly as strongly because they're just coming into this model and this is just what they know. But when we've been doing the coaching for a long time, I think partly because we don't actually get our hands on dogs all that much, that this concern came up. Our advice is to let it go. Let it go. You're going to get more done, period. I mean, our research suggests that even if a dog trainer only works a dog for 1 hour a week in addition to seeing the client, that the results are better. Okay, and the tipping point where we really see results go much more quickly, is that 3-in-1 model, which is part of why we recommend it. But the thing is, you're going to get more done, period. Your being in their training means they are going to get more results than if you hadn't been. I mean, there's just no way around that. And your goal is improved quality of life for the owner and the dog, not perfection. Right? There's no such thing as training perfection. They're live animals. They're going to make decisions. There's no such thing as 100% reliability in a behavior, and you're not promising that. You don't have to achieve that. You just have to make things better, and you can. And you are so much more able to do that than the typical dog owner. So try to let the performance fear go. You're going to make their lives better, period. And just communicate as you go, right? Just communicate as you go. If things are going more slowly than you expected, let the client know. Right? We're a bit behind schedule this week, and there's usually a reason. It's usually because there was the clients let you know that there was an incident, and that set the dog back, or you've gotten in there and found out that there's some other things going on that weren't clear in the initial consult that are slowing the process down, or perhaps you've come in and the dog's actually a little bit fearful and nervous around you, and you've had to do some work around that first. Just let them know. We're a little bit behind schedule this week because of X, Y, or Z. I'm going to do my best to be catching up as we go, but I just wanted to let you know that there's some possibility we might need to add a bit on the end, but I'll keep you posted, right? Just communicate. Okay. And also, when you're communicating goals, when a client, for example, in a dog-dog case, a dog who's reactive on leash, the goal is not a dog who walks up to every single dog, wags its tail, sniffs through rear ends, does a perfectly polite and model greeting, right? The goal is to be able to have calmer, less fretful, more relaxed walks. And you are going to talk, as we said before, in an earlier slide, about the range of outcome, right? We're probably not going to see probably not going to see perfect greetings on leash, but what we can do is make walks much less stressful for you. We can, make walks where, your dog is able to go through an entire walk focused on you. That's going to be our goals. We're going to, that's what we're putting together. And so, again, you're talking about the range of possible outcome, and you're just talking. Your ultimate piece is we can make this better. You're not guaranteeing, right? And that's unprofessional and unethical. You're not guaranteeing a particular outcome. But you can confidently say, we can make this better. Okay. Because you can. Policies. Really critical in any training program, but particularly, again, in day training. Here's the thing about cancellations. 24-hour notice is not a cancellation policy. It's like what is the word I want? It's a polite policy. It's somebody just being, polite and letting you know. But a cancellation policy is supposed to save you from losing money, and 24-hour notice isn't usually going to do that. we're not, it's not usually a sort of situation where you can just slip another person into that, particularly not in day training, because you're usually working with a set number of clients that you're seeing multiple times a week, and so you can't just, slip somebody else into that slot. So that's not a cancellation policy, and we really recommend just not allowing cancellations, because to allow a cancellation is basically to suggest that it's okay, which it isn't, to suggest that it's all right to be inconsistent, to suggest that it would be okay to skip a transfer session so long as there was a 48-hour notice or even a 72-hour notice. I mean, the bottom line is it doesn't matter how many hours. It's about follow through and setting everybody up for success, because all the sessions are done. And Scott's asking in the chat pod, do you schedule all appointments with clients right at the start? And yes, you certainly can. I mean, so you can, for example, say, okay, I'm going to work your dog Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or whatever your days are going to be, and our transfer sessions are always going to be Friday evenings at 7, or Tuesdays at 6, or whatever your Saturdays at 10, whatever your session is going to be, so that they just set that aside for the next X number of weeks, however many weeks your program is going to be. Absolutely. And there's also another question about emergency cancellations such as illness. I mean, certainly, if the dog's been taken to the vet and, has 3 legs in the cast and just, absolutely can't work, then, obviously that's an absolutely reasonable exception, and you can postpone the training and pick it back up when they're ready. And if a client's been in a car accident or something and is shook up, then yes, you can reschedule. But the thing, what we're not tolerating are the, oh my God, I'm so busy and I just overscheduled myself and I wasn't thinking, and those are the ones that we don't allow. And so part of the way you do this is you reiterate again how critically important. And you don't really have to worry about cancellations for the dog training sessions because they don't have to be there. So that's not usually the issue. The issue is usually the transfer sessions. And so you reiterate again when you're going through your policies verbally, walking them through your contract. You've said it out loud, as well as having them sign it. Again, because the transfer sessions are so critical to success, we don't allow cancellations. If you have to cancel a transfer session, we'll reschedule it, but you will be charged for it. In other words, they get charged double, because that's a spot in your schedule they're taking. I mean, it's a day training. Full-time day trainers. Full-time is about 4 clients. You figure you're doing a 3-in-1. You've got 4 clients. That's 16 sessions, and that doesn't include follow-ups for previous clients or initial consults for new. So you get that, and you're looking at 22 sessions a week. So you're only taking a finite number of clients, and so you have to. They are basically reserving a spot in your schedule, and they need to pay for it whether they use it or not. And so there's sort of a built-in incentive not to cancel these. And so when I call you and say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, things got a little crazy this week, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it, your answer is, oh gosh, Veronica, I'm so sorry to hear that, but listen, we can do that, but before I take you off the schedule, I just want to remind you about the cancellation policy we discussed. I will have to charge you for the appointment. Are you sure there's no way we could make it work? And I'll tell you, you say that, 9.9 times out of 10, all of a sudden, oh yeah, I actually can make it work, and now I'm thinking maybe I'll, cancel my haircut appointment instead, or I'll cut something else, because usually we just overschedule and we're looking for something to pull out of the schedule, and you just need to make it really, really clear that dog training isn't that something. And so, again, just the cancellation policy is that, no cancellation. Payment policy. We really recommend, if you're doing day training, that you take credit cards, that you open a merchant services account to take credit cards. You can do that with your local bank, or you can, there are various online services, and Costco does it. There are all sorts of ways to do it. And it's very simple. But that you accept credit cards, because day training is the sort of thing, you're going to have people who are attracted to this service because they have more money than time, but you're also going to have people who have no time and who are financially viable enough that they could pay for this on a credit card, but they can't just write a check. That's not going to be comfortable, but they really care about their dog. They really need this problem solved. They're very attracted to the idea of a trainer doing it for them, and if they could put it on a credit card, they would. And so credit cards just allow you to take a wider variety of clients. Um, you also might consider offering payment plans. Again, because you want to make your service accessible to people who are willing to pay you for it. The only thing about payment plans is you do want to put some careful boundaries around them. You should absolutely require payment by credit card if you are doing payment plans. You should require an agreement to complete the training plan because, it's so common for people to get partway through a training plan and ditch it. And in this case, in day training, typically the reason that happens is they're starting to actually see results. And so it's really tempting to say, oh, gosh, this is just looking really good. It's so much better, and, maybe we don't need that last week. But as trainers, we know that's a terrible mistake because we've set the amount of time we've set because we want to proof the behaviors well enough to make sure they stick when we leave. And so we don't want to end early because that usually means that new behaviors unravel and old behaviors come creeping back. And so we want to make sure they understand, that the contract is very clear and that we've also said verbally very clearly that they're agreeing to the entire training plan. And the reason is that we want to set them up for long-term success. And you literally explain that, if we don't fully proof the behaviors, they fall apart. And then stipulate automatic payment dates and amounts because with a payment plan, you're probably taking payment after the training's been completed. So if you're doing 3 weeks of training and they want to spread that over 3 months, for example, you're still taking payment a couple of months after you finish the training. And the farther out it goes, the less obligated people feel to pay. And so we want to make sure that you get paid. And we also want to make sure that you don't spend a lot of time doing extra office administrative paperwork, chasing people down and invoicing and re-invoicing and second notices and reminder notices. Instead, you just in the contract it's stipulated, the payments are going to happen for this amount on these 3 days, and you're pre-authorized to run the card. And so you just, you run it for the first payment, and they, you emailed them a receipt. The second, a month later, you run it for the second payment, and you just send them a receipt that says, your card's been run for this much for the second payment of 3. There's one more payment coming on, this date, and that way you're not hassling with a bunch of invoicing and all of that. And you're much more likely to be paid. Okay, pricing. You price day training just as you would coaching. You charge for each hour, including the training sessions, regardless of whether you're training the dog or the owner or both. Your time, you should be receiving your professional rate. You can give a small discount, $5 to $10 off per session for more than 1 week. So basically, you're saying to the client, we're talking about a 3-week training plan, and because I'm asking you to commit to 3 weeks, I'll give you a package discount. And if you think about it, if you take $10 off, per session, they're saving quite a bit. So that's nice as well. One thing to remember, though, is that if you're going to give a discount like this, that's pretty much your de facto rate. I mean, that's pretty much what you're going to make almost all the time, except for perhaps the initial consult, and the very rare times that you do only 1 week of day training. But most cases require more than that. And so, if you want to be paid $100 an hour, for example, your rate should be $110. Because if you want to be paid $100 an hour and your rate's $100, most of the time you're actually going to be paid $90 because you're giving this package discount. So let's look at an example of this. So let's say we have a 3-week day training plan based on a 3-in-1 model, and that this trainer charges $100 per hour. So for 3 weeks, we're going to have 3 training sessions each week plus a transfer session each week. So that's going to be 4 sessions per week, which means 12 sessions total. 3 times 4 being 12. Plus, we're going to work those 2 follow-up sessions in because we know we're going to need them. So that's 14 sessions total for the package. 14 sessions times $100 an hour would be $1,400. But if we're going to give them a $10 per session discount, that'll save the client $140, and the package will be $1,260. And so this trainer's de facto rate is $90 an hour. That's what they're going to make most of the time. Okay. But it's nice because $140 is nothing to scoff at. I mean, being able to say, that will save you $140, is a nice sales point. Okay. So again, it's the number of training sessions per week times the number of weeks plus the follow-up session times your rate. And then if you're going to build the discount in, then you take the $10 per session off. Marketing. One of the things we love about day training, particularly since our focus is so much on business, is we love the marketing message. People want that easy button, and we complain about it all the time. Oh gosh, all these people, they just want us to train the dogs for them. And our answer is, well, yes, of course they do. That's why they call the professional dog trainer. And as Gina said in the beginning, most of them, it doesn't mean they don't love their dogs. Most people don't homeschool their children. It doesn't mean that they're not active, loving parents. They leave that up to educators. And, it's perfectly all right for a responsible, loving dog owner to want to leave the training up to dog trainers. Just the same way I want to, leave. I don't want a lawyer to tell me how to argue my case and then send me into the courtroom by myself to do it. I hire the lawyer to go in there and represent me, and I don't want a plumber coming in and walking me through how to fix my plumbing problems and leaving me with written instructions and some materials and checking back with me in a week. I want them to come in and do it for me. And rather than fighting the easy button, the desire for that, which we're never going to overcome, it's part of our culture, offer it. Give it to them, because you can. You are a dog trainer, and you can do it faster, and you can do it more conveniently, and you can do it more effectively. We'll do it for you, as Gina said in the beginning, is a much, much more effective marketing message than we'll teach you how to train your dog. For most people, that is a completely unattractive notion. And it doesn't mean they don't care about their dogs. They wouldn't be spending time looking for a dog trainer and willing to pay one if they didn't love their dogs. So give them the easy button. Stress that in your marketing. We'll do it for you. We know you're busy. That's why we do it the way we do it. So really, really stress that in your marketing. Move away from messages about, we train you to train your dog. We can help you to do blah, blah, blah. Just say that you're going to do it. Move away from messages about improving the relationship with the dog and improving the bond with the dog. People don't wake up in the morning and decide they're going to call a dog trainer because they woke up thinking, I really want to improve my relationship with my dog. They woke up thinking, I can't stand this behavior anymore, or I'm really tired of him not doing this when I ask him to do it. And although that is a relationship issue, that your goal of improving relationships between dogs and people is your goal. It's not a marketing message. And if you want to improve the relationship with people, the best way to do that is to get them to hire you with a good, positive marketing message, and then get in there and change the dog's behavior. Because nothing changes the relationship between the dog and the owner more positively than a dog who is responsive to the owner. I mean, that, like as Gina said in the beginning, the more well-behaved a dog is, the more a part of the family it is, the more integrated it is, the more well-treated it is. So use the marketing message to get in there so that you can make those changes. In terms of thinking about who this message is targeted to, busy families and busy professionals, really are your main targets. Suitable socioeconomic status and a commitment to their animals. And again, they don't have to be filthy rich to do this. There are plenty of middle-class, busy families and professionals that will, again, if you make it accessible, with payment plan or that sort of thing, will jump at the chance to have somebody, solve a problem that is impacting their day-to-day lives in their home with their dogs. So, we're thinking about, busy folks that need problems solved. Whether that problem is an obedience problem or a serious behavior issue, that you can get in there and you can help them out. Okay, so we're looking at people who are not interested in being dog trainers themselves, but are committed to their animals and are busy and need a problem solved. In thinking about marketing, we really, really encourage the use of professional community marketing tools. So things like newsletters, articles, lecture series, etc. In other words, trying to think about how you can put your expertise on display. If I read an article you've written in a local paper, that's going to be much more impactful than if I see an ad you've paid for. If I pick up and read a newsletter that your company produces, that's much more impactful than picking up a brochure. It's not that you can't use those things too. It's just that the more types of marketing you can do that really show off your expertise, the better. And if you're not, if you're not a strong writer, if you're not a comfortable public speaker, there are other things you can do too. You can, for example, share your written reports, with your client's permission. Share your, if you do a behavior write-up, share that with the client's vet. That's a great way to start getting referrals because you're showing the veterinarian your professionalism and your expertise instead of just trying to tell them about it. You can also take advantage of things like we have a newsletter service if you want a newsletter but don't want to produce it yourself. I mean, there are ways to get around these things, but again, you're looking to have people interact with your expertise in some way. Inviting the local press to cover your innovative service. If everybody else is doing coaching and you're doing this kind of different approach where you're going in and doing it for people, contact a small local paper and get them to come out and interview you and take some pictures of you working dogs and do an article about you. That can be a very powerful marketing project as well. And if you want more specific ideas, a whole range of ideas to do this kind of marketing, you might think about taking our Dog Pro marketing web seminar. You can download that. It's one we've recorded in the past, and you can watch it at any time. And that's one way to get a long, extensive look at community marketing. And then of course we also do the one-on-one coaching to help people put marketing plans together that are really specific to their skill sets and comfort zones and communities. But again, focus. A couple other quick tips too, though. Make sure you focus your website on day training and the marketing message. All your materials, focus on that marketing message. Don't bury it. Don't put it on as an add-on. You really do need to redo how you're presenting what you do if you make this change. And then also, one simple thing you can do is to share the day training with other dog professionals. Let the daycares in your area, the dog walkers, the groomers, the boutique supply, pet supply stores, etc., people who are serving similar populations, the target audience you're serving, go tell them what you're doing. Tell them in person or email them or invite them out to lunch. Think about putting a small local dog business group together where you get together once a month and brainstorm and support each other. But get out there and network with these folks because they're a great source of referrals, and that's completely free marketing. Okay. So, training plans. What does this all actually look like? First of all, critical that you sell the number of weeks that you actually need. That you sell the number of weeks you think you need to undo behavior, to install new behavior, to get it proofed. Customize it to the client's goals, to set everyone up for success. We really encourage people to move away from set packages, this notion of, do you want a 6-pack or a 12-pack? Do you want a 3-session package or a 6-session package? Because, A, the client shouldn't be making those decisions. You're the only one qualified to make the decision about how much training is needed. When we don't customize it, we set everyone up for failure. I mean, if you sell 2 weeks for something that needs 4 weeks, the dog set up for failure, the client set up for failure, you're set up for failure. So aim high when you're not clear. If you're not sure, if you're thinking, oh gosh, is this 3 weeks or 4 weeks, sell 4 weeks. Because if you finish early, you and the client can celebrate that, and nobody minds if you give some money back. And in fact, they may be delighted to use that week to do some other thing. But that's much easier than getting to the end of 3 weeks and realizing that you have to ask for another one. And, that can be done, but it's less comfortable than celebrating. Wow, you and Fido have been amazing, and look, we're done a week early. So aim high if you're not sure. It's better for the client and better for the dog. You want to plan backwards from your training goals. So, you and the client have set some goals about what you want to see happen, and then you're thinking, okay, well, as a trainer, what do I need to do to make that happen, and how much time do I need for each of those steps? If you are not sure how to answer that question yet, which is really, which is a common discomfort at the beginning of this, because we're so used to giving people some advice, coming back and seeing how far they got, and then giving them some advice for the next week. That we don't, unfortunately, because we have this very unfortunate reliance on that model. Trainers often haven't learned how to put a training plan together in this way. And if that's the case and you're feeling like you'd like a little bit more support on that, there are a couple of options. One thing to think about is the Behavior Modification CD, which is essentially a collection of R+ training plans for day training cases, so that sample plans for every behavior issue for what a day training plan might look like, so that you can take a look at the basic average plans and then adjust them accordingly, whether you've got a case that's a little bit easier, a little bit more severe, but that way you're not starting with a blank piece of paper, from scratch. And also case consulting with Gina. I mean, that's a huge part of what she does, is she teaches people how to do this and helps people through difficult cases, and so you can get some one-on-one support that way as well. In the meantime, though, that leads us to the next section of the program, which is we're actually going to walk you through a sample plan from the BMOD CD so that you can see exactly what a day training plan might look like and how things proceed from one session to the next, and what happens in the training plan, in the training sessions, and what happens in the transfer sessions and the follow-up sessions. And so I'm going to hand that over to Gina now, and she's going to walk us through a step-by-step example of what this actually looks like.
Okay. I've just changed your screen so that you can see one of the sample plans, or at least the beginnings of it. You received an email where you had a hard copy of this, so if you want to follow along with the hard copy, that's fine. If you don't have the hard copy in front of you, though, it will all be on the screen for you to take a look at. So we've covered quite a bit up to this point. We've talked about how day training works and how to manage client expectations, how to set your policies, and then market the service. Now let's take a look at how to implement some of these things by actually, looking at this sample plan. And again, this is from the BMOD CD. The plan that we're going to look at today is one for handling a case of on-leash aggression and with fear as the motivator for the aggression, just to kind of put it in context. We don't have time today to discuss the various treatment options and training methods for dealing with on-leash aggression that's motivated by fear. We're just going to take a look at this is one way of doing it, and the reason we've chosen this obviously is because it's laid out in the day training format. So while there are other ways to treat this, here's one example. And I included on here the full behavior problem overview and training plan so that you can see what it kind of looks like on the CD. So, for instance, every behavior problem has this beginning piece where there's a preface or a basic introduction to the problem, and then some common parameters or the pieces of the training that you're going to juggle that make the training harder or easier for the dog. So in this instance, distance, how far away the dog is from other dogs is one parameter. You might start far away and get closer. Or duration, how long the fearful dog has to be near other dogs is also something that you might play with or might be a piece of your training plan. So common parameters are just the typical pieces that you want to account for in your training plan. And then we move on down to technical errors. And the common technical errors cover errors made by clients as well as errors that we typically see made from the trainer themselves. So is order of operations wrong, meaning that if you're doing classical conditioning, you're presenting, if you're using food, maybe you're presenting it before your dog has a chance to see, the dog being trained has a chance to see the new dog coming or appearing. That's a typical technical error that you sometimes see. So this is just kind of a checklist to make sure that you go through and you haven't encountered any of those in your training. And then after that, you'll find that there's a section for just behaviors that you need to install in order to work that particular training plan. Today we're going to take a look at a plan that includes using a loose heel to help the client maintain control of the dog on walks. It also asks or requires a watch or a find it, not both, and we'll talk about that, just breaking the ability to be able to break the dog's eye contact when it sees other dogs. And then the last piece is a turn and go, which is just a management or kind of the escape strategy for teaching the client how to move away quickly from other dogs. So those are the three kind of key pieces to the plan. In all of our plans, there's also the adjunct training, which are just other things that you might train if you have time or you might ask the client to help with, which might help speed up the training or just be useful in the training process. And then there's the management section, and this is the section for which the things that the client is going to have to do to make sure that the training plan is protected. So that's all kind of included in the overview. For today, though, we're going to go ahead and start with the training plan. That's what we're going to take a close look at. And this is the training plan overview. I purposely chose a training plan that wasn't a typical 3-in-1 like we've been talking about, where you meet with the dog 3 times and with the client once. This one is a little different. That way, I just wanted you to be able to see that even though you're day training, there's still quite a bit of room for variation in your training plan. So today's session is actually a 5-in-1. In this session, the trainer meets with the dog each day for 5 days and then transfers the behaviors once a week. One of the reasons you might do this, particularly in this kind of case, is if you've got a client that is not able to walk their dog without the dog displaying or getting upset, and yet they still need to take their dog out to go potty. If they don't have the backyard, the fenced-in backyard, then this might be a plan that's appropriate for them, because every time you come and see the dog, you're able to provide a potty break where you can really protect the training plan. So the dog's not having explosions, too many explosions, so that you're getting backed up in the training and taking steps backwards. So just by seeing the dog every day, you know that at least one of their walks is protected. And then we'll take a look at the training goal. This particular training goal is important as it tells you what your task as the trainer is. This is where you want as much information as possible about what it is the client wants you to train. So you want to ask the question of yourself, what must the dog do, is the first question. And then the second is, where does he need to do it? In this case, we're looking at a dog that can comfortably, just without display, just comfortably walk by, pass and greet other dogs on leash walks, and stay focused on their owner. If this is my client, I would probably also want to know the specific locations where those walks would take place. Are these in the neighborhood? Because that's very different from I want them to be able to do it at the local street fair. I also want to know, is there a particular path in the neighborhood that's really difficult because maybe there are a lot of dogs tied out or behind fences? Does it have to be that route, or can it be a new one? Can you establish a new one? What's the flexibility there from the owner? For the owner, the goal for the owner in this plan is that they are able to manage difficult situations. We don't want to forget that. We want them to also learn how to be able to walk this reactive dog. So that's the training goal. If you move from there down to the summary statement, this is merely an overview of the stages of the training plan. So here, again, in this case, the plan starts by changing the emotional response to other dogs, and it installs a low-level DRI behaviors, differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior, so things like sit and watch. We plan to start with parallel walks and then actually work up to greetings, which is even a little bit further than the goal asks for. Finally, the dog learns to walk, with multiple dogs in random patterns, just in real life situations. If you're using the Dog Pro business CD, there's a vet communication form on there. Veronica alluded to giving reports to clients' vets about how the dog is doing. There's a vet communication form on that CD. If you're using that, this section, this summary statement, is exactly the kind of thing you want to put in kind of your treatment plan overview. Like this is roughly how we're going to attack this behavior problem. And as I said, the breakdown for this training package is a 5-in-1. So 5 training sessions with a dog and 1 transfer with the client for 2 weeks. So that's how you get to the 10 sessions and the 3 client transfer sessions. And then at the end of the 3 weeks, there's simply a client transfer session and follow-up. The plan leaves room for up to 2 more follow-ups. You'll see that kind of added in down there. Those are to be scheduled at the trainer's discretion. So for some clients, these may happen immediately after the training. Things are going pretty well. You're checking in pretty frequently, and that's that. For others, you may elect to spread them out. So you may want to do a follow-up at 2 weeks and one at 4 weeks because you want to make sure they've had ample time to practice, encounter different situations, so that when you come back and follow up with them, you're able to troubleshoot any problem areas they've had. So you can kind of schedule those follow-ups at your, like I said, at your discretion. Okay. Next, let's take a look at how this actually then breaks down. And so if you're following along in the paper section, it's just where it says week 1 at the top. You start in week 1 by installing some basic DRI behaviors. So like I said earlier, if you're kind of shaking out the learning theory cobwebs, that's the differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior. In other words, you're giving him something to do that he can't also lunge and bark at the same time. So you're giving him something else to do. You're going to start these right away, and you're also going to change the dog's emotional response to other dogs pretty quickly, and you'll see that down as early as session 3. You're going to start that. Your biggest goal in this first week is to have a dog that can walk nicely on leash and has 1 or 2 behaviors. So in other words, you're going to do either the turn and go, you're going to do the turn and go in either the find it or the watch. You're not going to do all 3. And Veronica talked a little bit about that. The reason is because you want to make sure that not that the dog has a ton of behaviors, but that they're really fluent. And you want behaviors that they can use to manage dog encounters. If you're trying to teach all 3 DRI behaviors instead of just 1 or 2, you're trying to teach them a bunch of things. First of all, teaching 3 is going to take more time. And you're going to lose that early on fluency that you need for your first transfer session that week because you're spending so much time teaching all of these behaviors. But even more importantly, particularly when you're working with clients who have an aggression or working with a dog with an aggression problem, giving the client a choice of 3 different behaviors to ask for is a way to get them is paralysis. And if you've worked any of these cases, I'm sure you've seen it where the client can get the watch beautifully, and suddenly when their dog sees another dog, they don't know. Should I ask for the find it? Should I ask for the watch? Should I do a turn and go? They completely freeze up. And it's because it's hard to learn a new behavior and also use your decision-making skills at the same time. It's 2 different parts of the brain, really hard to do. So this is really difficult, particularly in the beginning stages of their learning. So it's better for the dog, it's better for the human if you're just teaching 1 or 2 behaviors at a time, not then also adding the multitasking skill on top of it. Again, particularly if these are mechanical skills, new mechanical skills for the client, makes it really difficult. So even though you as a trainer might find 3 behaviors really helpful, choose the one that you think is going to be easiest for the client to execute and most effective. Add that to the turn and go, and then you'll be ready. Then you'll be ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down then and take a look at what the client. So as you can see, this first week is just installing those behaviors, and you'll see right away you're adding distractions. By session 3, you're choosing behaviors that you can even start proofing with distractions pretty quickly. They don't take very long to install. And then when you get down to the client transfer session, in this session you're going to give them tools that they need to help manage situation. So you're going to teach them things like reading the dog's body language and helping them to understand thresholds, because if they don't understand these things, they're going to have a dog that's continually going off and setting the training plan back. So you're going to go over those concepts that are important for them to protect the training plan, and you're going to give them some hands-on practice. In the session, this entire session is geared towards management. So this first week is not about them helping the dog get better. This first week is about them not undermining the work that you're doing. It's all about management. So we're using the turn and go so that if they blow it, they get too close to another dog, or if something unexpected happens. A dog comes suddenly from around the corner and their dog displays. We need to give them something that they can do quickly and easily and get out of the situation and either prevent or minimize displays. So the turn and go is really good for that. Then you'll practice management. Either practice that turn and go with their dog, or ideally if you can get a therapy dog and use a therapy dog first until they have their mechanics down. That's kind of a reoccurring theme in a lot of training plans. When you're teaching someone, again, to learn a new mechanical skill, that's really hard to do if they're already nervous about their dog on the end of the leash. And again, in aggression or fearful displays, people tend to be embarrassed. Sometimes they're scared about holding the end of the leash, and so that fear keeps them from being able to perform the mechanics. It gets in the way. So if you can take that away by letting them practice on a different dog, a dog that isn't going to explode, a dog they feel safe and comfortable with, just until they can I call it doing the footwork. It's like learning dance steps first by yourself and then with your partner. It's going to be much easier for them. So even if it's in the same session, letting them get comfortable with what it is they're supposed to do before you give them the hot dog, and by hot I mean, displaying dog. Before you give them that dog, make sure that they're comfortable with what it is they're supposed to do first. You'll find that it really boosts their confidence and helps them to be a lot more successful. So that's kind of the first week. I'm going to go ahead and move on then to week 2, so you can kind of see then what do you do in week 2. In week 2, you're going to continue your classical conditioning. So you started it a little bit last week, just changing the dog's emotional response to other dogs, but this week you're going to really hit that even heavier. And then you're going to take those DRI behaviors, like I said, either the watch or the find it, and you're going to install it in the presence of other dogs. So now it's going to be something that they can really use on their walks by the end of the week. You're going to start having the dog walk some simple patterns so that they're getting closer. You're decreasing distance, increasing duration around other dogs. But by the end of the week, you're working up to actually walking kind of in real-life context with other dogs. And you're going to finish, if you have time or if it's part of the client's goal to actually have the dog meet, then you might do some controlled greetings as well. You'll find in this kind of case, a lot of clients just want to be able to pass other dogs. They don't really care if their dog goes up and sniffs and does that whole thing perfectly, as long as they're, able to pass other dogs and look, happy and jaunty. So that piece may or may not be part of your plan. Notice that by the time you get down here to the transfer session, you've walked the dog in multiple locations. You've already started to generalize this behavior. So before you get to the transfer session, it's not the dog's first time around the block. He's been around the block and he's been a few other places as well. You should also have asked someone else, again, Veronica was saying, an assistant, a husband, a wife, somebody, a former student, to try walking this client's dog to be sure that the skills will stick with a different handler. There is nothing more frustrating for a client than watching their dog behave beautifully with you and fall apart when they take the leash. It makes them feel inadequate or not, like I'll never be able to do it because I'll never be able to do it like you. He'll never do it for me. And that sometimes comes out as the dog is damaged goods, or it comes out in those myths like, see, he does know how to do it. He's just choosing not to because I'm at the end of the leash. All of those things are harmful to a training plan and harmful to the relationship between the dog and the handler. So in order to protect that, making sure that there's been a handler other than you that has handled this dog before you pass that leash over is really important. And it doesn't mean that they have to be at every single session, but just at some point you've accounted for a more of a novice handler than a trainer. So if you've got a really slick assistant, that's maybe not the best person. Really, it should be somebody walking the dog who does it, who's going to behave more like mom or dad. That's important. In the client transfer session, you're working on management techniques again, but you're also making sure that the client is comfortable walking the dog with other dogs close to them. So you see they're doing some parallel walking here. The dog is staying in a loose heel. They're not doing sniffs, and they're not necessarily encountering dogs that are popping up out of nowhere, but they are just getting used to the idea that their dog, in fact, can walk in the presence of another dog. That all of those things that used to happen, their dog barking and exploding and being embarrassed, that's not happening anymore. It's important that they have a chance to see that, that their dog is, they don't have to run from every dog they see at this point in the training plan. All right, now we'll take a look at week 3. And you'll see there's not as much going on in week 3. It's a shorter week. This week is all about getting the client ready to walk their dog in the neighborhood. The dog is ready now. You've been walking them in the neighborhood for a while, but now it's the client's turn. And so at this point, the client should have to be real comfortable with the turn and go, be really comfortable with either the watch or the find it. They're not thinking about, do I turn to my left or do I turn to my right? It's become just part of their skill set. And you'll take them out for just a walk, their normal walk. Ideally, the route that they like to walk if they're kind of stuck in. I always go this way. And you're going to prompt, but only as you need to, focusing the client and reinforcing them whenever possible. So at this point, you're going out for a walk and you're kind of the safety blanket. You're there, you're helping out if they need it, but you're allowing them to have time to make decisions. And remember, their decisions are going to come slower than yours would be. So you see a dog, don't immediately prompt them. Pause a moment and see if they see the dog, and then, adjust accordingly. And if not, you're going to prompt them and help them out. Just don't be too quick to jump in. You need to give the client time to react and demonstrate that they can handle these situations without you. If they feel like they're relying on you to point out every obstacle along the way, they're not going to feel comfortable walking the dog the next day when you're not there. So this is all about them getting the sense of, okay, the trainer's here, that makes me feel better, but I could do this. But you also don't want to let them flounder. If you have to prompt in order to have them be successful, then definitely do so. Because you don't want them just feeling lost and digging themselves a bigger hole out there. By the end of the appointment, the client should be able to take the dog out for a walk on a pretty regular basis now, which is why there aren't so many sessions now. Then there's the follow-up. In the follow-up, this is where you're going to just check in. So you're not going to prompt when you take a walk with the client. So after you've checked in with them on the progress, reviewed the training goals, always keeping those foremost in their mind, talked about any management issues that they're having, maybe done some practice controlled greetings where the dogs are actually getting closer together, even with them at the end of the leash. Then you're going to take them out on that real life walk. And again, you're going to prompt, but you're going to only prompt if you absolutely have to keep them from having, total disaster. It's okay if they don't do everything perfectly here. You want them to feel like they really are driving by themselves. Okay. And then there are the additional follow-ups that we talked about. So the additional follow-ups give you more time to take real-life walks with the clients because, again, this is the part that's really scary for them, is being out there. Situational awareness is something that isn't, learned in one session. It takes some practice. So, this is a chance for you to help clients who are either struggling with mechanics or if you've got a dog that was a particularly tough case and just needs more practice, then these additional follow-ups help out there. They give you time to start clients in a more controlled setting earlier on and then work up to more difficult situations if you need it. And again, typically you're going to need these kind of sessions if you've got clients whose mechanics are just particularly not great. Maybe they've not had a dog before, or they just don't have that natural knack and they're going to need a little more practice, or for dogs who are, it's just going to take longer to generalize for them. The keys to this plan are just a few. The first is be sure you're not transferring things too quickly. You want to make sure, Veronica talked about this earlier, that the dog is a pro before you hand the leash over to the client. You're supposed to have the behavior ready to go for the client before you transfer it over. If you transfer too quickly and the behavior isn't complete, from the client's perspective, it feels like their failure because they know the dog will do it for you. You need to focus on management first with the dog and the client because it doesn't do any good for you to go 5 days a week and work on the problem if when you're not there, the dog is constantly seeing other dogs and exploding. So you need to make sure that there's a really airtight management plan in place, both from the dog's perspective but also for the person, because these people need some relief. They need to stop being embarrassed, and they need to stop having those awful feelings that come up when their dog explodes or looks aggressive. So focusing on the management plan first with the client before going too far down the rehab road is important. You also want to make sure that you're not giving the client too much to do or that you're not giving them too many decisions to make. And like I said before, that part of that is using therapy dogs whenever you can. Remember to break mechanical skills down for the client as you would the dog. So, don't give them coaching on turn quickly, turn to your left, keep the leash loose. If you give all of those directions all at once, it's going to be too much. Try to practice the exercise repeatedly, giving instruction on one thing at a time until they're fluent. You want to provide generalization opportunities, so make sure you've accounted for new locations, different types of dogs that might be met in the neighborhood, and the different handlers. Make sure that you've covered all of those bases before you're asking the client to. And finally, then you're going to just make sure that you're scheduling sufficient follow-ups that allow handlers success. So, easier level challenges for them first with lots of prompting, and then you're going to fade your prompting and raise the bar a little bit on them. Okay? To a lot of trainers, when we say that we'll work with leash reactivity in 3 weeks, if you've been using the coaching model, that sounds like there's no way in the world that this could be done. But it really does just depend on how you set up the training. Intense daily training is going to move more quickly than a once-a-week coaching model that we typically use. And obviously, again, that's because you come one time, but 6 days a week the dog is being walked and they're over threshold. That's especially true if the dog is, got an experienced handler at the end of the leash. So this is just one way to set up a day training plan. You don't necessarily have to do a 5-in-1. You could do a 3-in-1. It can be scaled back to fewer sessions a week. If the client, especially if the client has a yard or a way to pee the dog in between sessions, so that they're not messing with the training plan. Day training allows for more flexibility and lets you be more efficient at the same time. That helps when you're trying to sell day training because you're able to sell the number of sessions that you need to get the job done, as opposed to coaching where you see them once a week. Well, then you have a bad session on week 2. Well, you know that every once in a while in a training you might blow a threshold and a dog might display, and it's not the end of the world. Well, if they're only seeing you one time, though, it is to the client the end of the world. So, getting in there and making sure that you've got the sessions that you need to recover from any situations like that are really important. Let's see. I've got some questions here. Can you give an example of what could be trained in 1 week, 3-in-1 on average? Okay, so I think the question is just basically, what takes 1 week of day training and what takes 3? If you're doing 3 sessions a week with a client transfer session, depending on how much obedience you're working on, sometimes obedience and manners is going to take place, and you might be more successful with those in 1 week. If you're looking at behavior modification, though, you're probably looking at multiple weeks, 2 to 3 generally. But again, it all depends on what is the client's final goal. So even something as simple as a downstay can take a while if what they want is downstay in the middle of the park with squirrels running around versus I want him to do a downstay in my living room. So really, really important when you're trying to plan out how many sessions is this going to take to have a really clear idea of what the client's expectations are for the dog. And let's see, I think Chris has a question. Transfer session number 5. Transfer sessions each week. We're gonna have to answer that one offline, I think, because I'm not sure I know what you're asking off the top of my head. But Veronica will answer that for you. Okay. We will go ahead and continue to take questions on this or about marketing and policies in just a minute, but I want to make sure that Veronica has a minute to review some special offers that we have for you today. So she's going to do that, and then we'll come back and do some more Q&A. And Chris, I'll take a better look at your question and see if I can answer that then. So Veronica is going to...
Okay. So, so as Gina said, we're going to take questions in a moment, but we also are hoping that you might take a moment to fill out this last poll for us at the close of the class. Do you feel differently about any of these aspects of day training than you did at the beginning? That gives us a sense of how we're doing here. We also, we've mentioned the behavior modification CD a couple of times, and also the business CD for trainers, which has the contract and the vet communication form and all sorts of other pieces for running the business. And as a thank you for attending the seminar with us, you have a $50 discount on file for both of those. You can use it for one or the other or both. That's good for a week from when you've taken the class. And there are, if you want to take a look, you can get more information about the BMOD CD and the business CD on the website. And we also, you can learn a bit more about the case consulting that we mentioned and the business consulting on the website as well. There's also, in our article archive on the website, which is a collection of a whole lot of free articles, mostly business related, there's an article on day training if you want to use that as a way to back up what you've learned here today as well. And then we hope that you enjoyed the web seminar format and will take more classes with us. I mentioned the Dog Pro Marketing web seminar. That's one you might take a look at. We also have a few coming up, one on being a full-time dog pro, making a transition to full-time training. We have one coming up on time management, which is something that several people at other web seminars suggested, and so we took up the suggestion and have that one coming down the pike. And then also, if you are particularly interested in dog aggression issues, we have one called Master the Growlies Redux, which is sort of a little sample preview of what we do in our 2-day Master the Growlies in-person workshop, which we're going to be holding a couple times this year as well. So just some other classes we hope you'll come back for. And thank you so much for taking the poll. We appreciate that. So I am going to go ahead then and open us up for questions. So,
Veronica, I'll take Chris's first.
Oh yeah, you bet. And just while Gina's answering that, if you've got a question, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either go ahead and type it into the Q&A chat pod as we've been doing, or if you'd like to ask it live, that little blue guy, the little guy with the blue shirt down in the lower left-hand side of your screen with his hand raised, if you hit him with your cursor, then we'll be able to tell you've got a question, and we'll unmute you and take the question live as well. Okay, Chris's question?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris, for following up. Chris's question has to do with whether or not you do the transfer session with the client on the same day or at the same time just after doing the session with the dog, which is a great question. I would recommend, I think same day is fine. I think that, and maybe this is just, my own, training bias, is putting the dog on ice for a bit and then bringing them back out, I think is sometimes really helpful. Because you're going to be working the dog probably for close to an hour, to do a transfer session immediately after that is going to be too much for the dog in most cases. They're not used to training for 2 hours, so I would definitely make sure there at least there's some time in between. So if you're working the dog in the morning and you want to do the transfer session that evening, I think that absolutely you could do that.
Yeah, and some of it, so, it's so difficult because you have all the considerations about the dog and its ability to perform, and it's going to depend a little bit on who the dog is, right? I mean, if you've got, a 2-year-old Jack Russell, you may not need to ice them as much as you do a slower-paced dog. The other consideration is scheduling, and if you go back and review the early slide that showed the sample schedule, in one way of thinking about that, it's going to depend on your geography. For those of you who have a lot of distance between appointments, you might have to compromise a little bit in order to get efficiency into your schedule. And so, for example, you might stagger your clients. So that slide had us training on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And let's just say, for the sake of simplicity, that you are running 3 clients at a time. You might have one client run Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and see that client at the end of the day on Friday, and you see that dog last so that you don't have to go to that house twice. So if driving is a real issue for efficiency, that's a possibility, although, as Gina points out, there is some training sacrifice there. Then you might see client number 2. Your week with them would actually be Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, and then you'd see that client at the end of the day on Tuesday. And in week 3, that your third dog, you're seeing Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then seeing that dog on your first Thursday evening appointment. So again, you've got one less stop. So that's one way to do it. I'm sorry.
You don't have to ice the dog for very long. Even if you just go and get dinner or always schedule time to sit down and make some calls while you're on the road, or do some emailing and then come back. It's not that they just need a little bit of a break.
Right. Related, we also have a question on the chat pod about, they say, we have a training center. Will this work if the client brings the dog to us? Yeah, absolutely, and that's one version of this model. We have some clients doing that successfully. There are advantages and disadvantages, as with anything. The advantage, of course, is you don't spend any time in the car. They're bringing the dog to you in the morning, dropping them off, and coming back in the evening, or scheduling that however you want it scheduled. The nice thing about that, of course, is that you've got the dog there for a longer period of time, and rather than doing the training over the course of an hour, you have the ability to do multiple shorter training sessions, which is lovely. The disadvantage is that you're stuck in the training center, and so unless you have a training center where there are other employees that can be watching the other dogs, you're limited in being able to take the dog out into the wider environment to proof it. And so that can be one drawback to that model, but it can absolutely be done successfully, yes. Let's see. It's a great question. Scott says, how do you approach costs without choking? These are some pretty high prices. Yeah, and I should have spoken to that during that slide. I don't think, and Gina, you can tell me if you have, I don't think that I have ever worked with a client who was making this change or given a talk on this without somebody asking this question, because it's a huge source of anxiety, because as it is, we're generally not dog trainers aren't generally really comfortable salespeople anyway, and so there's this fear of, gosh, I'm having a hard enough time selling, $300 or $500 worth of coaching. How am I supposed to sell $1,200 or $1,500 worth of day training? And people have that fear until they try it, and then it dissipates. And one of my clients summed it up just perfectly, but, we hear this sort of thing over and over again, but she said, wow, it's actually easier to sell $1,500 of day training than it is to sell $500 of coaching. And it is. Because think about the difference. Give me $500. We're going to work together for 5 weeks. I'm going to give you all of this homework in between. And, if you don't do the homework, it's not going to work. And it's really up to you. You have to do the homework or it's not going to work. You have to train your dog. Or somebody's saying, give me $1,500 and I'll get the training done. And, I'll do the training for you and we'll be done in 3 weeks. And you don't even have to be there. I mean, it's a much, much more powerful message. So as long as you're directing it at folks that can afford it, who can pay for it, if you either out of pocket or if you give them ways to do so, you should find that it's actually much easier to sell this, even though it's more expensive. the reality is that the only reason it's more expensive is because we're actually selling the number of sessions that are needed. If we sold the number of sessions that were needed in coaching to get the same results, coaching would be far more expensive.
And take a lot longer to do.
Yeah, take a lot longer to do. So the answer is, take a real deep breath and, tell them what you can do for them, and see if they don't think that's a pretty nice idea.
This is also really freeing for trainers in that if you need to fill 16 slots a week, it doesn't take very many day training clients to fill those. If you needed to find 16 coaching clients a week to make whatever income you need to make, that's really a daunting process because that's a lot of selling you have to do, and you have to do it every single week, as opposed to, taking fewer clients but seeing them more frequently. What that does for you when you go into the sale is mean that you can walk away from the table sometimes, which is not usually a position dog trainers are in. Usually you need every client you can get because you're trying to fill all these spaces, as opposed to you can be a little choosy, which I think is really nice because there are times when you get into an initial consult and you're thinking, this person is just not going to be worth some money. I'm not sure if this person is really that committed, and you don't have to feel like you have to put on the full court press to make that sale. If you walk away and the person says no, that's okay because you're not going to be able to take everybody who wants the service anyway.
Yeah, this is such great points. I mean, right. I mean, think about how different that pressure is. You don't have to have a service that's right for everyone because you only need about 4 clients at a time. And on average, you're going to be seeing them for at least 3 weeks, which means you only need to add, 3 to 4 weeks. So you're really only talking about needing to bring a client on, roughly 1 a week or so. Right, and so the sales pressure, right, is so greatly reduced. So you're going after a clientele for whom this is the right fit.
And it's always easy to stay more confident when you can walk away from without feeling like you have that pressure to make the sale. And the more confident you are just in your general demeanor, the more confidence people are going to have in you and being able to solve the problem.
Yeah. And we have another payment cost-related question. If you offer the option to pay over a few months, do you also offer a larger discount if they pay sooner rather than later? That's up to you. You can. What some folks do is they make paying by credit card and payment plans that they make that a little bit more expensive, right? They might not give as steep a discount, partly because you're paying some bank fees on that. So you can absolutely you can have a different price for payment up front versus payment staggered over time. I think it's perfectly fine to do that. I wouldn't make an enormous deal out of it because, people, usually you're doing that when you're working with a clientele who could pay up front. You're saying, hey, you have a choice to make. You could go either way, so let me give you an incentive to pay up front. But if you realize that your clientele are largely people who couldn't do that, then you might not do that. You might just this is how we do it. We do it on payment plan, and this is the cost for that. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Gina?
No, that covers it.
Any other questions out there?
As I'm looking at the poll, I'm seeing that in general, it looks like people are more comfortable with client transfer sessions and the client end of things. Hopefully, those last couple questions helped you feel a little more comfortable about the selling part as well. If not, though, please feel free to ask some more questions about that.
Oh, Amadina points out, makes a good point. You have to be, careful not, right, she says to be careful not to break the law by charging more because a client is paying with credit card, and that's very true. You do have to be a little bit careful to skirt the details on that. Right, that's sort of a large topic, but that's something that you can talk to your bank about when you set up your merchant services account. Just what are the specific rules around how how you can charge people differently with cards and how you communicate those differences. But thank you for pointing that out, Almudena. Any other questions out there? Okay. Well, it's such a pleasure being with you. And thank you again so much. And if we can be helpful one-on-one, you can contact us directly, Veronica@dogtech.org and Gina@dogtech.org. And if you have any other questions, we're always happy to talk with you. And thank you so much. We hope to see you on future web seminars.
Thank you, everyone.